one of the action items, we've been talking about the WHO, we've been talking about the DOJ, but one action item is zeroing in on the WHO, the World Health Organization. And I think we just have to defund it, as Chip Roy was talking about. So we have a petition that we're sending to Congress. You can sign on to it regarding the WHO. Just text WHO to 67742. That's 67742 WHO. It'll take you to a link. You can sign it, and we're going to be delivering those because I think Chip Roy is absolutely right. We've got to draw a line. We've got to fight over these things. These things matter. We do not need to give any more power to an inept global entity like the WHO. Well, Democrats would like for Americans to believe that giving the government more power is in their best interest. We've seen that is far from reality. We've seen the corruption. We've seen the deception. We're seeing an eroding of the moral fabric. As I was talking about with Congressman Self, I don't think it's this lawlessness is accidental. Yes, it's on our borders, but it's also on our streets. And I don't think that it is just coincidence that at the same time we're marginalizing God and faith in our country. The two are essential elements to creating this anarchy, if you will, that leads to, as Congressman Self talked about, totalitarianism. You have to have it. You have to. People want order, and so they'll surrender their rights. So this is why we need vibrant faith engaged in our country. We have to have a moral foundation. And we've even seen in our tax code, as of late, an effort to kind of marginalize, minimalize the role of faith-based organizations. But there's an effort to try to make sure that that presence remains vibrant simply by encouraging tax-deductible gifts to religious organizations. Joining me now to talk about this and much more, Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. He served students and families for more than 20 years in ministry before his service in Congress. He currently serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Committee on Ethics and the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. Senator Lankford, welcome back to the program.
Absolutely great to see you, Tony. Thanks for the intro statement there as well. And you are correct. I actually read George Washington's farewell address on the floor of the Senate today, as that has been done every year since 1893. And he has a whole section about despotism and about you cannot have morality as a nation without having faith as a nation. He challenged us when he left the White House to say, don't lose track of your faith.
Yeah, those two pillars, which are inseparable, religion and morality, and don't think that you can have morality without religion. Before we get into this, I first want to congratulate you on being a recipient once again of FRC's True Blue Award, which honors members of Congress for defending and standing up for faith, family, and freedom. And of course, you've done that ever since you arrived here in Washington. So congratulations and thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you. Thanks for the honor. Thanks for continuing to be able to stand up for what's right.
Let's talk about this bipartisan bill. You actually had a press conference this afternoon discussing this, but you have Democratic support for this that helps nonprofits, religious organizations, and those that they serve. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this Charitable Giving Act is pretty straightforward. You can't itemize if you don't meet the standard deduction. A lot of families, about $26,000. If you're not donating that much or have that much on a mortgage interest deduction, then you can't itemize anymore your charitable gifts. We want to incentivize folks, folks of all incomes, to be able to give. What I remind people all the time is the safety net in America is not government. Government's last as the safety net. The real safety net in America is families. Then second, it's churches and nonprofits. And third, it's government. And if we're continuing to be able to drive the safety net towards government, we'll never be able to keep up at all. And so we've got to be able to make sure that we stay on track with that. So our focus is pretty simple. Encourage people to be able to donate to their charity of their choice. We're not telling them and limiting who they can give to. But if individuals choose to be able to give, they can write that off in their taxes because it's going to be spent more efficiently in a nonprofit to meet human needs than it will in government. So let's incentivize greater care of human needs in the nonprofit world.
I want to dwell on that point for just a moment, because critics of this would say, well, you're giving money to these religious organizations. That's money that the federal government is not getting. But in reality, in fact, I remember a number of years ago, Arthur Brooks wrote a book, Who Really Cares? And he talks about the profound impact of charitable giving upon both the recipient and the giver, and how better it expands and reaches individuals, has the multiplying effect, if you will, than if it goes through the hands of government.
Yeah, that's correct. So a government's efficient at sending a check out to someone, but they can't mentor, they can't do real job training, they can't really engage with homeless and to be able to walk through them for long seasons, mental health care. So many areas where the federal government tries to be able to jump in and help, but who's really efficient at that? Churches and nonprofits are really efficient at that. So if you want to do homeless care, do you want to go to a federal shelter, or do you want to go to a shelter that's actually provided by a faith-based organization that's going to walk them through life? But that's what I'm talking about. Let's encourage that activity.
And there's a crowding out effect when the government gets into this and pushes out the nonprofits, and now they're having to compete with, as you said, the lack of tax deductibility. But there's also policies that we're seeing come into place here that is denying the religious moral foundation from which many of these organizations operate. That's just as concerning as the financial contributions coming in.
Yeah, it's very significant. This administration at HHS, Javier Becerra in particular, has been very focused on trying to strip away conscience protections, areas that are already statutory in law. They're still trying to strip away.
When you look at where we're at in this country, in our culture, where the trust in government is declining, in fact, almost every institution has declined in its trust of the American people. I was talking about in the opening about the lawlessness that we see, whether it's on the border or on the streets. We have to have a vibrant moral foundation. In fact, going back to what you were talking about with George Washington, most of the founders recognize that this experiment doesn't work without a moral foundation that rests upon religion. What do we do to restore that in our country?
So I'd love to say we just pass a bill and it fixes that. You and I both know that's not how it works. It's modeling, it's families. It's, quite frankly, from those of us come from a biblical perspective, it's returning back to First Peter and realizing we live in a First Peter, first century era type world and culture at this point. It's getting individuals to be able to make a difference in their own families, mentor families that are around them, getting engaged in their community, setting the example at work. People will be drawn to what is good and right. But right now, the culture is running away from what's good and right. There'll be a pendulum swing back, and they'll turn around and say, this is disastrous. Well, what's happening in Seattle and in Portland right now, the whole country is looking at it going, the whole place is falling apart from the anarchy there of the far left extremism. And people are saying, that's not what I want as a culture and as a society. When they turn around, there better be a good, loving, respectful example that's out there saying this is a better way. So to live what we believe, as frank as I can say it, is a good model for us to be able to do. And don't forget to be able to not only mentor your own children, but to be able to engage with families around you. Nations are built by families. If our families collapse, our nation collapses.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think what I see our role in Washington to do is just to protect that role that families, that individuals have to live out their faith unmolested by the government, and parents not being called terrorists for wanting to make sure that their children are not indoctrinated with the left's ideology.
Yeah, what a radical idea to actually call parents rather than domestic terrorists. No, it's a basic principle in this. If we want to be able to have faith and be able to live our faith, let's guard that right for everyone else around us to be able to live our faith. I jokingly tell people I'm a Baptist. Baptists were kicked out of all the good colonies. We had to flee to Rhode Island and ended up in Providence, Rhode Island, establishing this place of religious liberty, even when we were a colony. So we were experimenting this early on, protecting the rights of all individuals to be able to live their faith, but we're still protecting that right. And quite frankly, it's still a remarkable thing when I talk to people from all over the world, as you have, that there is still an awe of a nation that can allow any faith to be able to thrive and individuals to be able to live that faith. Let's guard that for both this generation and the generation to come.
And the best way to guard it and protect it is to use it. And we need to each and every one of us use that. Senator James Lankford, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today. And one final question for you. How can people help you with your measure? What do they need to do?
Well, they can reach out to our office or reach out to other Senate offices or House offices as well and just talk about charitable giving. We've got a lot of folks that are on the Hill today actually wandering around and talking about it from nonprofits all over the country, both faith-based and non-faith-based. This is not discriminatory because if we discriminate against people of faith or against secular organizations, there'll be discrimination the other way as well. So just people reaching out to their representatives and saying, hey, I heard about this Charitable Giving Act that will encourage more charitable giving. I do giving personally, and I want to be able to get a tax write-off for benefiting those that are in greatest need. They'll know what it is. I can assure you. We've made it clear.
All right, Senator James Lankford, have a great day.
Good to see you again.